Good afternoon. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Rail Committee meeting of the City Council of Palo Alto for March 19th, 2024. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Burt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lowing.
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Haynes.
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. So our first item is public comment for any item that's not otherwise covered on the agenda. And do we have any speakers?
We don't have any speaker cards and there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. So then we'll go on to updates on interagency activities. And our first is on Caltrain related matters. That's a big subject. And then just so everyone knows that our action item is a review of the grade separation alternatives for Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston, including consideration of Caltrain staff comments and to provide feedback and direction to staff and recommend that council advances or eliminates specific alternatives for preliminary engineering and environmental documentation phase. So that's the big item that we'll get to after the updates. And so on the Caltrain updates, I don't know who would like to lead off here.
Thank you very much, Chair Burt. Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official. Can you hear me? I'm not. No, not well.
There's a lot of mics on right now.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Okay. How about now? Is it? Okay. There we go. I'm not sure if Caltrain had anything they wanted to share today, although they'll be sharing quite a bit later today. Anything else that you'd like to update the committee on?
I hope this is on. I might be stealing your thunder, Philip, but I think for the most part, we were really happy to host LPMG members and members of the public at last week's public workshop for the corridor crossing strategy held at Redwood City. So thank you for all those who were able to make it. And we'll continue to keep this group as well as other members of the public aware of our next LPMG meeting and specifically the corridor crossing strategy workshop. And then otherwise, we'll be hosting a public train tour in San Mateo County on May 11th. And once again, this is a tour that's for the public to actually walk the electric train sets. So hoping that for those who have not been able to make it, we'd love to have you attend and happy to answer any questions, or folks can reach out to me directly should they require any additional information. But that's all I've got, Philip.
Well, Navi, thanks for that update. And the LPMG workshop, which we had all three of this committee members attend, was really about this corridor-wide crossing strategy and how to have a strategy that will result in more effective pursuit of funding from regional, state, and federal agencies. And so I want to thank Caltrain staff for everything they did on that. Navi, thanks for the update on the, it's the fifth tour of the new train sets that Caltrain has done.
So I'll go ahead and give the information on that if that's all right. It's May 11th. I'm sorry, the fifth one. You're asking is the fifth tour. I was just going to provide additional information. It's at the San Carlos station.
Yeah. And I think it's the fifth one. And the point I was going to make, or the question was, when will the one at the second largest train station in the system occur?
Never misses a jet.
Caltrain is really excited to be partnering with the city of Palo Alto and Stanford and planning for the upcoming station tour. And so we have not landed on a date, but we're hoping that it'll be soon in the next couple of months.
And we're hoping that that'll be after some of the sprucing up of the station has actually occurred. All right, thank you. I didn't want to, that's correct. I don't want to miss an opportunity to make that plug. Okay, and I will just add one other thing, reporting out as a Caltrain board member, which is that our Chief of Safety Operations, Mike Meter, gave an update a few weeks ago and about his responsibilities include internal safety of all the workforce and construction work, and external of the public safety throughout the system. And one, he really updated us on two things. One is there's the safety and security aspects, and on the safety, it's outside of securing the corridor from intrusions that have resulted in fatalities. We also have a real pattern of vehicular collisions that are occurring at the grade crossings. And he showed that from San Francisco to Gilroy, there was 71 at-grade crossings, I think. And that, if I'm remembering the data right, that 40% of the vehicular collisions occurred at just 5 of the crossings. And the number one location for vehicular collisions in the whole corridor is at Churchill. And that he is working with different necessary agencies and partner bodies, including our city, on some significant improvements at Churchill, shy of grade separation, of really paintings and markings and other aspects, as well as working with Google to try to avoid what are a bunch of misguided directions from Google Maps that people confuse and think they're supposed to turn on the tracks. So all that's happening. And then second, he updated us on a more corridor-wide set of safety initiatives that Caltrain is ramping up on. And we'll have opportunities to talk about that in the future, but I'm enthused about the commitment and the more comprehensive approach to that. I just was made aware, maybe we're all, Nadia might have forwarded it to us, but Brightline in Florida is cutting back some of their ridership. And part of the problem on Brightline is that they have the highest fatality rate of any rail system in the country. But they're a private agency. The second highest and the highest of any public agency in the country is Caltrain. And our need to address fatalities from different sources is something that I think needs to be elevated even more. And I'm really pleased that Caltrain staff is really looking at this now in a more comprehensive way, and I'm anxious to see the outcomes of that. So next we have, anybody have any questions on that point? Julie?
May I just say, I appreciate that you let us know that. I wasn't aware of those data, and they're startling. And I think we're all clear this is the fault of nobody in this room or the organization of Caltrain, or it's a systemic thing we haven't quite put our finger on. And I just want to acknowledge how painful it is for everybody involved to be associated with tragedies like this.
And the reason that I really want to lay those numbers out on the table is because it's through recognizing the reality that we then act. Philip, next on VTA.
Yeah, thank you. I don't believe I have any updates on VTA, but I will dive in and provide additional updates on Caltrain. So Caltrain can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that this month Caltrain successfully completed their testing of the electric trains in the Palo Alto area. So, all right, getting nods. So got that one right. And also want to talk about the quiet zone projects. Our Palo Alto Avenue quiet zone project, the consultant that we have has already completed the 70% plans, and that's being reviewed internally through our Public Works Department. And we're getting feedback on that. And the next step will be coordinating with Caltrain and with CPUC to get their their review and comments before we prepare the final plans. And we're hoping to target a fall construction timeline. Wait, is that right? Fall?
All depending upon.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Depending on how long it takes for CPUC, we need the GO 88 to be approved. And we'll need encroachment from Caltrain and all of that. So all that, but depending on that, we hope that we could have a fall construction timeline.
Remind us how long the construction is?
We don't know that. That's going to be pending the final plans and so just to give you some insight to what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to incorporate that into an existing public works project, like a existing paving type of project. So hoping to incorporate it into that. So it would probably be a very short project once it starts, as long as it can be incorporated into that. For Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossings, that was the one that was recently approved by the City Council on March 4th. The contract is now executed, and we've issued a notice to proceed. This is the one where I get a little bit confused, Chair Burt, where you were talking about the Caltrain enhancements at Churchill Avenue, but we also have our own project that we've been working on, which is the Section 130 project for the Churchill Avenue crossing. And that project's been fully designed and awarded by City Council for construction. And we're continuing to collaborate with Caltrain during the design and moving into the construction. And the contractor is now conducting potholing for utility and underground relocations and procuring the necessary traffic signal equipment, which actually there's been some long lead times in procuring that equipment. And then for Charleston Road, we're starting a similar process. We're working with the state on a funding agreement. I should note that that project, the Churchill Avenue crossing, and same for this one that will be with Charleston, is fully reimbursable through Section 130 funds. And so we're currently working on a similar project for Charleston, and we're working on the funding agreement with the state. And the project will review the existing conditions and then identify potential safety improvements similar to what we've done at Churchill. We can assume that there'll probably be signal modifications, pre-signals, preemption, and similar to what occurred at Churchill. Just to give a brief grant update, we have our FRA grant. We've been meeting with the FRA and collaborating with Caltrain and VTA in the development of the funding agreements necessary for funding, allocation, and programming. And we'd like to have that funding agreement finally finalized and executed in June or July this summer. And we're also coordinating with VTA for necessary agreements that will be required between the city, Caltrain, and VTA for the PE and environmental phase. And the FRA has informed us that they are negotiating with the California High-Speed Rail Association to amend their existing contract and become the lead agency for all the projects on the high-speed rail network. Yes, for NEPA, for California high-speed rail. So CAHSR to be the lead agency for the grade separation project that the city's working on.
I think that deserves a deeper explanation here.
Yeah, just to clarify, California High-Speed Rail has been given authority and by Federal Road Administration to be an environmental lead in California for several projects along the California High-Speed Rail segments. So they are extending that authority in this segment also and negotiating a final agreement. That's already, they already have, it's only for NEPA environmental document review and approval process.
Okay, only for that. I want to make sure that if there are any implications on us, that we're understanding what those are.
We are trying to find out, and actually we are also asking Caltrain, who have expertise in their environmental department working on these similar issues for the NEPA documentation, and they have previously used FTC, and we are also inquiring FDA, sorry, and we are also checking with FRA to see if we can utilize FDA as a lead agency for NEPA, and so we are kind of finding that out as now, and we'll keep you informed as we move along and find more information about it.
Yeah, and so it's one thing on kind of the notification of what is happening. It's another subject or related is what are the implications of that?
Correct.
And I don't have an understanding of that, and I'm not sure any of us do. And so kind of just hearing that it's happening without us knowing whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or neither, and why it matters. I think we need the context for that as soon as possible. And maybe the answer is, it's all copacetic, no problem.
Yeah, no, we are also on the similar questioning thing that how does that impact our project? There may be some additional cost associated with it, as they will be the reviewing agency. FRA previously has their cost absorbed within the grant, and so there may be some additional cost. There may be a conflict of interest that we are raising, that at California High Speed Rail being the being the operator along this corridor and having review the projects maybe. So we are raising those same questions and concerns to the FRA and finding out from Caltrain and environmental staff also what kind of implications are going to be on our NEPA and CEQA. So it is kind of learning curve for us as well.
I think it's fair to say that the FRA is still trying to figure out how to do everything that they're doing right now. And not that I'm trying to throw them under the bus or throw them in front of the train or whatever, but they're trying to figure out how to deal with this grant funding and how to allocate and how to deal with the process. So I think they're still trying to figure out. So we're getting information and we're trying to, understand it, but they're also trying to figure out how to proceed with this. So it's been a process.
Do we know if they've had to be involved in the Burlingame and then Mountain View? Like, does this mean all grade separations on the corridor, or just ours because we have a 4-track section and they think they're involved? Like, what makes them?
No, in 2019, California governor had a agreement with California High Speed Rail to do the environmental lead for FRA projects, and they're extending FRA having some lean staffing and wanting to extend that same for other projects along the corridor is in negotiations with them. That's what I'm hearing. And
does it flow from the funding?
Sorry, tied to the grant funding.
As Nadia notes, this is interesting in that for the bulk of the corridor where there are no passing tracks planned for high-speed rail, they will use our 2-track system, but why they're the lead agency on this isn't clear to me. And maybe it's an innocuous outcome, but until we understand the implications, it's cause for concern that we're in the dark on whether there could be implications that adversely affect us. And that may not be the case, but I'm concerned that we don't know what.
Yeah, I'll just say that we had a similar reaction. So,
Okay.
This might be something you want to raise at LPMG, because if all the cities on the corridor are going to be subjected to High Speed Rail Authority stepping in on what's happening with grade separations, I think that's a big policy thing that everyone would want to understand, regardless of where they're getting their funding.
Yeah.
no, it's if FRA is a funding authority. The
Sure.
FRA is delegating their authority for NEPA to California High Speed Rail.
so essentially it's if you receive the FRA funding, then the FRA is saying that our NEPA and CEQA will be reviewed by the high speed rail. That's how they're delegating yes. Or at least that's what we've heard, in this initial discussions.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
we're still working through it on our end. I don't want to say anything I don't know for sure. But just to echo Philip and Ripon, it's because of the grant funding. It's not something that they're looking, as far as I know, to get involved in if they don't have a grant involved. So that's really the source of it.
Okay.
Let's keep talking about funding. The Section 190 grant application, we're going to be attending the CPUC public hearing for the Section 190 grade separation funding on April 3rd, 2024. Actually, Ripon will be attending that. The CPUC announced that our projects are contained in the ranking list of grade separation projects for FY 24-25 and 25-26. And the ranking of Palo Alto projects are as follows. Churchill Avenue was ranked 9th, Meadow Drive was ranked 12th, and Charleston Road was ranked 13th. And in the Bay Area, Broadway and Burlingame was ranked 1. Linden Scott in South San Francisco, San Bruno was ranked 6th, and Ringstorff in Mountain View 7th. Those crossings were ranked higher than the Palo Alto crossing.
And I'm not looking to do a review today, but I think we'd want to understand the criteria.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. But some of the criteria that affects the ranking is the cost cost of the projects and the requested funding, the volume of vehicular volume at the at those intersections. So those were higher for those crossings that put us down, and we can be strategic in our next applications.
Actually, as I think about it, I'd like to get that as soon as possible because I'm meeting with the CTC board on Thursday, California Transportation Commission. And when I think about this statistic that just came out in the press that Caltrain has the highest fatality rates of any rail system, public-owned rail system in the country, how does that or should that translate into rankings?
And it does have collisions also included in that factor, and I can forward you their formula for calculation of the ranking.
Yeah, but a fender bender and a fatality are not the same. And so when we're talking about fatalities being the highest in the country, this leads into really the corridor-wide crossing strategy and how it should be treated at the regional, state, and federal level because of what we now appreciate. We always had our own concerns, but seeing how high that is nationally should not only elevate it in our own eyes, it should elevate it in the eyes of these agencies. And I'm not sure that that's been translated into criteria that would result in that. You know, it's that garbage in, garbage out. If you don't set the criteria right, everybody goes, oh yeah, we followed the formula, and the conclusion just doesn't seem correct. And so that's why I really want to understand the criteria.
Can I ask, is that list, is it all impacted by what projects have been selected already, or whether there's been alternatives discussed for those projects, or is it strictly just like a risk and volume and analysis in that basis? Do we know?
So I'll let Ripon provide more context on this, but the project needs to be to a certain level of in the process in order to even apply.
Okay.
So, sorry, with that, if there are any other questions or anything else to provide, that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Well, let me just add a few complimentary updates. So my understanding is that the initiative that Mike Meter spoke about at Churchill, which is kind of some very extensive painting across that is and some other factors, that's not part of our Section 130 program, but I don't know how it's complementary and integrated with it. So, but it's not one and the same. It's additive to what we're already doing. Second, I wanted to make note of something on the quiet zones, because we've been pursuing quiet zones, really as a quality of life issue for residents who are highly impacted by that noise. And what I realized, recently and was reminded is that when we had our previous teen suicide clusters, we had come to understand a number of principles from experts in the field, national experts with clusters that occurred for a variety of different reasons. And a principal ingredient to these tragedies happening is means availability. And in some areas of the country, that means that there are firearms near the door. And a teen is always reminded that that lethal means is right there in front of them. And what we had realized a dozen years ago is that one of the aspects, we not only have means here, we have every 15 minutes a reminder to teens throughout the community of that means. And the train noise is a significant but unquantifiable component of contributing to suicides on the tracks. And I had lost sight of that and was reminded of it. And I went, oh yes, I remember that now. And that is a real additive value of the quiet zones that we should be including in funding applications, in our own prioritization of it. It has one level of priority, which we're already pursuing based upon quality of life. But when we add this, it elevates it even more. So I just want to share that. And I did have a question. We've had these ongoing problems with excessive gate downtime at Churchill. And this has gone on the last year. And I had been told months ago that there was a fix in order, and it was related to some confusion at the Cal Ave station. And so what we'll have is successive full downtown and recovery cycles with no train passing. And Michelle had spoken with me about that. And I thought it was being solved, and it was mentioned to me recently. No, it's still the problem. I observed it myself again. It's a significant problem. And we have, as a result, we have excessive backups now. Even though traffic has not recovered, we have very significant backups that are greater than should be the case based on our train traffic and our vehicular traffic. It doesn't look like anybody's taking notes, but it doesn't look like anybody's reaching for the mic. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Rob?
It's just part of the.
Oh, it's off.
It's part of the PSEP.
There you go.
It's part of the PSEP project, but we'll look into it and provide a response.
Yeah, it's been a year of a problem, and we were told, okay, now we didn't realize it was happening. We're working on the fix, and my goodness, it's still a year later.
Right, there was the initial, which was a 2-speed check solution, and then on top of that was a signal optimization project on top of that, but I'll check on the status of it for
Okay,
you.
thank you. Lastly, related to both VTA and Caltrain and everybody else, we've had so far 2 interagency tours at the University Avenue station, and to look at the condition of the station, which is basically dilapidated. And once again, it's the highest boarding South San Francisco. It is the highest number of buses of any transit center in Santa Clara County, about 500 buses in and 500 buses out per day. And it is, yet it is quite neglected. And the agencies have now embraced looking at near-term improvements and a set of medium-term ones, including related to this Quarry Road extension and circulation that has to be evaluated, new circulation as a result of that, and then even long-term, more fundamental redesign of the entire 90-plus-year-old station area. And the leadership, the CEOs of both Caltrain and VTA have committed to really collaborating on that, a multi-agency effort that, because there are so many parties on vested interest, land ownership, and operations, it's a real multi-agency effort. And the land is mostly owned by Stanford, also by Caltrain. Stanford's land is leased to the city. The city subleases it to VTA. VTA has probably the least skin in the game out of some of these agencies, but they're the managing agency for the station. It's the southern terminal of Samtrans. It is very extensively used, in particular, feeding Caltrain from the Marguerite system that feeds east-west, whereas Samtrans and VTA run largely parallel. And then it is AC Transit, and as a result of AC Transit and the Dumbarton Express, there's actually potential funding from design from MTC as a result of that. They're the least user, but maybe the best vehicle for funding source. VTA is interested in pursuing an earmark for the long-term design of this through this earmark cycle with Congresswoman Eshoo, where they're going to be requesting that the city be the lead applicant, but with support from VTA and hopefully from Caltrain. So a lot going on at that particular location, but we have a lot on our agenda today. So that wraps it up from my reports.
Thank you.
Chair Burt, we do have one public speaker.
Oh.
Okay. And Philip, did you have anything else on?
No.
Okay.
Our first speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Thank you. Oh, there's the unmute. Yeah, I just had some clarifying or additional comments to some of the many comments Director Burt made. You know, Brightline has a blend of suicides and accidents, and Caltrain unfortunately has almost all suicides. I'm very hard pressed to remember the last truly accidental death on the Caltrain line, and that's going back years. So we need to be clear-eyed about what grade separations can and can't do. Caltrain already, just like BART and completely closed systems, has quite a few suicides at stations, which are completely open and accessible. So it's important just to as a reality check, we can't think that the death rate will plummet if magically overnight the line is grade separated. Until stations are actually walled off, which is something that is in the great distance for BART, they're thinking about doing platform screen doors someday in the distant future. I sadly do not think that the death rate on Caltrain would drop dramatically. However, on Brightline, they're not used to fast trains. It's a very new corridor, and I've reviewed a lot of the accidents and the videos and so on, and they are truly accidental. There's people that are driving around the gates and trying to beat the train and getting smashed in their cars. Caltrain does not have that problem. It's very, very rare that people are getting killed in their cars. It does happen occasionally. And that leads me to the other point about Churchill. Churchill is, according to the stats, the worst for the vehicle intrusions. And it's not because Google is giving incorrect map data. It's because there is it's dark at night and there's an adjacent road that people unfamiliar with the area are trying to turn left or right on. And so that is the major factor there. And it is true. I've reviewed the Caltrain statistics, and I encourage anyone who doubts me to do so. They all occur after dark. And so what that tells me is that we need to light. Churchill is very dark at night, and it's easily confused with the roads. People are looking for Alma and they turn onto Churchill, or they turn onto the tracks instead. I'm sorry. So I think an easy fix that I've suggested over and over is to improve lighting there. Regarding the problem with the gate downtime, the crossing optimization system, staff has published a schedule, and most of the mid-peninsula, including Churchill and Palo Alto, where I live in Redwood City, is not due to get the optimization system until summer. And there is a schedule. I could look it up, but Director Burt can get it from staff. And I warned Caltrain about this problem years ago, and no one listened. I knew that it would be a problem when they proposed the speed check solution. So, but at least they're fixing it. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. That concludes public comments. So at this time, we'd like to go to our what we listed as a study session and an action item. Is it listed that way so that it's really an action item that we can?
It is, sorry, so just to correct that, it's the study session section is blank. There's nothing listed under a study session. I don't know why it shows up like that. That probably
Okay,
just didn't
good
get
enough.
deleted. So it's an action item.
All right, we're back
yeah.
to the action item on grade separation alternatives at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston.
Okay, thank you. I think if we can get the PowerPoint up, but I'll just kick this off. And I just want to note that we have a hard stop, I believe, at 5, and this is a really heavy presentation that we're going to get through. So I'm going to try and go through first couple of slides really quickly, high level. Once again, Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official. If we get the next slide, this is just going to show the members of city staff, Caltrain staff that are here today to present this. Next slide, please. The purpose of the item today is to review the grade separation alternatives in consideration of Caltrain's technical review and to get Rail Committee's guidance and recommendations for Council's consideration in the narrowing of the alternatives. And this is a high-level look at the efforts that really, started well before 2018, but this is really what's happened since 2018, considering the community outreach, the different committees that we've had, the council reviews, and then, the Rail Committee refinements with recent discussions, including additional studies, forward tracking, information from Caltrain, and then the further refinements to the alternatives. This is just a high-level agenda for today. And this is our current draft project schedule that really outlines the collaborative efforts between the city, Caltrain, VTA, and the FRA, emphasizing the importance of selecting alternatives and formalizing our agreements. And our aim is to begin the preliminary engineering and environmental phase promptly, ensuring that we can stay on track with our timeline, unintended, to meet the grant requirements. And this is just the high level next steps that we have, really going beyond this item potentially, but we aim to equip the Rail Committee with information to narrow alternatives or recommend a preferred alternative to the City Council. And the Council's scheduled to receive a study session in April. That date is a little bit tentative right now. It could be April 22nd or 29th. But that would follow with Council consideration of Rail Committee's recommendations at a date in June, likely in June, yes. And right now we have June 10th, I believe, as the tentative date that we're holding. And that would mark a significant milestone in advancing our project into the next phase. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Caltrain, and I believe it's Rob who's taking over.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Rob Bernard, Chief Rail Design and Construction. I just again want to thank the committee for the opportunity to work collaboratively with your team to advance this long-held vision. I know the community's worked on it for a long time. We welcome that opportunity to lean in hard to share our experience and expertise as we collectively seek to provide good information to support decision-making and to help select alternatives, advance it into preliminary engineering. There is a deadline with the money from FRA, and we recognize that and want to be very helpful. Next, please. So as noted by Philip, there's been a tremendous level of work that's occurred to advance these alternatives to this point. A lot of work by the community, the CAP and XCAP committee, a lot from the consultant team, Palo Alto staff, and this committee. A lot of work has gone into it. And so like I said, we are committed to advancing these alternatives and making an effort to improve the livability of the communities we call home, to improve the livability, sustainability, and make them safer. We started some of this engagement back with the letter from Ed Chicata back in June of 2022, looking at the vertical track grades. Could we change them from 1% to maybe 2%? And we did a lot of work with that, and the standards that we published at the beginning of this year changed those to allow 2% without a variance. We looked at 4-track segments to provide additional information, and we did an enormous level of work to try to refine those. So we've been leaning in for quite a while with that. We had conversations about bridge deck thickness and use of space under the structures. But from this execution of the service agreement, it gave us an opportunity to kind of look under the hood of these alternatives that the community has been working on for the last decade and really trying to take a look at what we saw. So we came here in January with that first step on the journey. When we took a look at the planning level documents, what did we see? Made a presentation on what we saw. But that's the start of the journey. The work after that is really to roll up your sleeves and figure out, try to find solutions with that. And so today's presentation is really trying to focus on what are the solutions in order to advance these projects into the next level. Next, please. So as we're looking at that solution-oriented thinking, really looking at developing those with the information we have today. We're not all the way in preliminary engineering. We're at the planning level. But we did take a little bit deeper dive because, as you've heard me say before at this committee, the details do matter, especially construction in an electrified railroad. And also we understand, of course, ALMA is a critical transportation asset to the community. And so we need to make sure that we take a good hard look at how it might impact ALMA, how do we do it around electrified railroad? It's right next to a residential community. How do we thread that needle and get solutions in order to make those things work? And we're seeking to kind of provide that balance. What's in the accommodates the needs of the many in the best way that it can? How do we continue to allow the utility of the regional investment in the rail system, but also enable the community's vision? And Councilmember Lowing, I want to make sure we heard you loud and clear about making sure we try to minimize any additional impacts to the community and the adjacent property owners. We looked real hard at that as our solution as we thought about those to make sure we honored what you mentioned during that last committee meeting. We hold that as well. Next, please. So what did we do? We met in January, and then the team went back and started to roll up our sleeves. So we're trying to take a look at what is the art of the possible. And so we had some engineering workshops and said, what can we do? What are some of those solutions? And we didn't want to do this in a vacuum. So the team thought up some ideas, and then we had a meeting with Ripon and others, and we shared kind of those emerging thoughts because they've had a lot of experience with the community and heard a lot of feedback. We wanted to leverage that knowledge and experience and that feedback. Then we went back and said, okay, with that, look at those. And then we said, okay, let's evolve those possible solutions a little more. And then let's take a look and meet with our chief safety officer. How do those work for safety? Meet with the chief operating officer. Do those meet your business needs to operate the railroad safely and efficiently? Then meeting with the director of engineering. Say, do these things, we're trying to, standards are standards, but engineers can be creative. Let's be creative. What are the solutions? And then we went back to the city and said, here's what we heard. What do you think? And then we went back and took that feedback and went to our executive director, said, here's our emerging recommendations. Here's what we see as the possible. Getting feedback from our most senior exec. What do you think? Are you okay with these? And then again, meeting with Palo Alto staff. We had the opportunity to share information with Director Burt. We had an opportunity with Nadia and Lou to share some of that feedback. Are we kind of heading down the right track, so to speak, with that? So we've been doing a lot of work in the background to get to where we are here today. Remember, the last meeting was, here's what we saw. then it's now what do we do about it? And so that's what we've been trying to lean in. What do we do about it? And realizing this is at the planning level. There's still PE to do and a lot more engineering. Next, please. So the last time we were here, we talked about those 200 some comments were kind of in three buckets. The first bucket's those that kind of on the Caltrain right away. The second bucket was things that would influence things inside the Caltrain operating right away. And the other bucket was in the road network. You know, Palo Alto is the road authority. They have jurisdiction over that, not Caltrain. But engineers, if they see something, they say something. So there are those three kind of buckets. But the team really focused on those that were kind of within the Caltrain right of way and took a look at them from a couple of different lenses. Safety and constructability. How do you build this thing? And then looked at the kind of the engineering standards. What could you, the art of the possible, and kind of practical constraints. You know, at Meadow, there's a jog in the right of way. That has implications. We should study that a little more. And then how do you actually maintain and operate the thing? Let's take a look for, you don't maybe need everything, but what's the minimum that you need to take a look at those things? And then of course, the last bucket we talked about are kind of the policy level agreement levels with that. You know, we do have long held criteria for preserve the right of way. There's a rail corridor use that overlaid more of structured decision making with board level guidance and oversight. We do have a kind of a property conveyance thing that's been around for a long time of, you know, how do we treat our right of way? Obviously, California High-Speed Rail, we do have an agreement with them that requires us to not make decisions that make it materially more expensive or complicated. We got to make sure we honor that agreement. And we have agreements with Union Pacific Railroad. So just kind of walking through, there's the engineering side of the house. How can we be creative? And then looking at those policy agreements and how can we make sure we honor those, but in a creative way as best we can. So then we launch forward. We're trying to figure out solutions. Next, please. So looking at those property things, you know, as our executive said to us, you know, the railroad's property is our most valuable and durable asset. So we want to make sure, as consistent with board policy, that we try to preserve that, but still do it in a way that still allows to meet the community's vision for those creative solutions. And so in areas where there's encroachments, right? It's, well, on Alma, it's only along Churchill, it's only 60-foot wide. Could you accommodate some encroachment? What do we really need? Well, maybe we accommodate some encroachment, maybe not all of it. And with that encroachment, we might need that property back if we go through, if 4-track comes through that whole segment. So that would say it's not an easement that's a property right. It's a license agreement that if we needed it in the future, we could still use it. And so it just says, what could we accommodate today and still meet the needs? So trying to look at that holistically. And then we also took a look at, this is more of a smaller item, but we wanted to make sure that we shared it. Today, as we're going up and down our alignment to inspect our track, we do that on our own property. Some of these improvements would build a viaduct or a wall kind of at the property line, and we would need to be on the Alma Street to do that. And so if we were going to be on Alma Street to do the inspection, we'd need a permit. And so we wanted to at least have the conversation about those elements. Next, please. So when we talk about retaining the utility and durability of the right-of-way, what do we mean by that? So this is a plan view of East Meadow where the right-of-way jogs, and we'll talk a lot more about that right-of-way jog a little bit in the future. But the Caltrain standards really is to essentially retain the utility of that full width of that right-of-way. Today, we can use that whole right-of-way in order to inspect our tracks. If we needed to install a siding track through there, we have the ability to use that full right-of-way. And as this gets grade separated, we want to find ways to still accommodate that use of that right-of-way. How do we preserve the utility of that right-of-way in the future in a way that accommodates the community's vision today, but still allows the ability to use it in the future if we needed it? And so looking at those solutions in keeping with the board's policy on right-of-way is to make sure you consider the entire width of that right-of-way and how you use it. So next, please. So here's a typical cross-section that was in the plans. And we had talked about whether it was 15'6" or 16'6" for those standards. And, you know, we changed that standard in the last round of our criteria. We had 15'6", and then in 2020, we changed it to 16'6". But we walked through that with our operation folks, we walked through that with our safety folks, we walked through that with our engineering folks and with our exec. Said we could live with the 15'6" as it's designed. Because as you said, council member Lowing, if you change that profile of the road, you're going to increase the impact to the neighborhood. We don't want to do that. Can you make 15'6" work? Yes, we can. We would need a sacrificial beam to kind of protect the structure. And so that's been done in other places. Metrolink does that. They allow that with a sacrificial beam and an agreement. If the beam gets hit, the city would pay for to get that repaired. So
What's the purple line here?
the which line?
The purple line that,
Oh, the purple line, that's the road coming down and back up.
okay.
And so that's just a cross section that shows the road going down and back up underneath the grade crossing.
I didn't know if it was a measurement or actually the road, so thanks.
So you see the little dash box, that's providing that width clearance for the full width of the right of way from a standard that's been there for a long time. The next, please. So there's this area right here that doesn't provide that 15'6" clearance for the entire width. Do we need that today? No, but we might need it in the future. So the notion there would be to provide an agreement that if in the future we needed to put another track across there or other uses for the railroad, that there would be an incremental cost to make the railroad in that location a little higher, a little more fill. And so it would be agreement to pay for that incremental difference so we could use the full width of the right of way or build the railroad higher today or rebuild the road. But it tries to say that what you have designed today, we can live with. But there would need to be an agreement that says in the future, if we needed it, if there was a little bit extra cost to make the railroad another foot or two higher with a little more fill, that the city would pay for that incremental increase if in a future state you needed to do that. And that would allow what we've designed today, what we know today, to move forward as is without making changes and increase the impact, but try to provide some level of protection to preserve a future use if it ever was needed. And so that was kind of the notion there. And I know it's a lot of words for this concept.
Is that about a foot? Are you saying that little piece of it is the approximate foot difference between 15.5 and 16?
Edgar, if I could call a friend, I don't have the cross sections.
Yeah, sorry, the mic didn't pick up the question.
Sorry. I'm just trying to understand. We're being asked that in the future to either redo the road or to raise the height somehow, and I'm trying to understand that what the difference is right now. Is it about a foot?
It depends on how the road gets profiled. As of right now, it would be approximately 2 feet on the west side. Again, that would be something that would be addressed during preliminary engineering.
And also note that we've shared with Palo Alto staff that there are structure types that have thinner structure depths, such as like the through plate girder has a thinner deck on it that might be able to accommodate the profile. So there are options for the structure type that can make it thinner. There are also, depending on the width, an interim column that would make the structure thinner. But we wanted to make sure that we find solutions that would meet the railroad's need, but didn't require more impact to the community. And so looking for those creative solutions to protect in a future state, you just make the railroad a little higher for that extra track, a little extra fill.
So would you even need the option to quote, raise the road? Wouldn't it be much more
Well,
likely
no,
you do
no,
that for the train?
The notion was, it wouldn't be up for us to make the decision. If you wanted to rebuild the road, you could.
Got it.
If you wanted to raise the railroad, you could. If you wanted to raise our railroad today, you could. But just knowing that we need that clearance to full width, and how do we accommodate that? And it's really a PE level of analysis, but we wanted to be clear that we could make 15'6" work. But if it wasn't the full width, we'd need to have some level of agreement. Does that make sense?
Yep, and you probably have a long notice period from
Yeah.
the time at which you need it,
It takes a long time to build anything.
particularly a railroad.
I do have one additional question there, if
Yes.
I may, and I know there's a balance between getting through the presentation and getting questions answered maybe at the end. So I'm going to ask this. If it's simple, we can answer it now. Otherwise, keep going. It's feeling obvious to me, which means I don't fully understand it. Like, why wouldn't we just build the road right in the first place? Something about the slope required. If we do that extra 2 feet at the ultimate depth, it's going to create a much longer slope. How much longer is that slope? Roughly.
Edgar, I think you did a little bit of math on that.
Yeah, it could be, again, it depends. There's variables that could be adjusted, but we expect it to be somewhere between 80 and 150 feet additional.
That means additional homes.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And so we were trying hard to not do that. Now, I talked about our standards, and Edgar, I failed to turn the mic over to you when we talked about kind of the standards. I know over time, our standards have evolved from those that we did in the early 2000s to now. Are there a couple of quick examples of things that have been with us since the beginning and things that have changed? Just a quick summary?
Yeah, just a few summaries. Clearance from the railroad has been something that's been documented since 2003. In fact, I know the criteria was shown as 2007, but it's been a couple decades now where clearance, for example, a 10-foot recommended horizontal clearance on structures was set by the JPB. And this was actually some of the lessons learned from grade separations in the 90s that were being applied by Caltrain as part of those updates to either the criteria or the standards for design of structures. So that's something that's been set for a couple decades. One major change is clearances to OCS poles or the overhead catenary system. That's been a new standard that has to be applied now. And while that can vary in how it's applied, it is something that's new that all new projects have to address.
So it's just,
I just want to make sure, have we seen the documentation that shows that a 16'6" clearance has been the standard for 20 years?
no, what he was talking about is on our drawings, we're talking about having a 10-foot clearance for maintenance access. And so today that for this condition with the addition of the OCS poles, now that goes to 25 feet, but it's been a standard to have that 10-foot maintenance access road along our tracks for the last couple of decades. And so that was an example of that's
But-
always been there. Now the 15'6" to 16'6", that was a recent change.
And that maintenance access road, there's one question whether that is the case in between crossings, but I'm not aware of that having been applied to crossings themselves historically. Can you cite where that
You want to get
has occurred in the last 20 years where?
You had one you looked up.
Well, it's been 10 feet from the center line to the edge of the bridge. That's been followed for recent projects
10 from the center line
to the,
of the track
yes, correct,
to the edge of the bridge?
correct.
And is that what's being requested now?
With the addition of the OCS, it adds, remember, this is Edgar, maybe you could provide more detail, but with you want to be able to drive a maintenance vehicle down the track to do your inspection. And so that's been part of the standard since 2003.
You said down the track, do you mean
Next to the tracks.
next to the track?
Next to the tracks, not on the track with a high rail vehicle, next to the tracks. And as you'll see in the presentation, that's at the bridges been increased to 25 feet because there's now an OCS pole at 13 feet. And then of course the foundation is 4 foot around, so it gives you another 2 feet. So because of the OCS, that gets a little wider. It used to be 10 and now it's 25.
That's
but it
not a
is
little, let me just say. that's
It's not a little,
No,
but it
and
is.
that's on each side, correct?
No.
Oh, with single side.
Single
Okay.
side.
But that's still, let's be clear. That's not a little. If it's a little, why don't you pick up the tab and we'll be good.
Understood.
Okay.
Edgar, are there anything else that I missed?
No, one additional item is that as more grade separations are envisioned in the corridor, the crossings do need to be able to facilitate that safe crossing for maintenance vehicles. And so that's for, again, safety of the maintenance workers and railroad staff. So that's something that is being cognizant both for current projects and as more grade separations are envisioned for the corridor.
Yes, Nadia.
So does the Mountain View project include that?
We are we've directed the team to make those changes.
And just to get it clear on Pat's question, Councilmember Burt's question, is this additional clearance for emergency and maintenance needed in between the crossings or at the crossings themselves, or both?
Well, when we get to the presentation, that'll become more clear, if that's all right.
I just want to loop back then to the Rengstorff. From what you said, it sounds like it did not include
Yeah,
it.
I need
and
more
you're
to-
going to require that as a change to their design?
So I need to look into it a little bit more. My understanding was that was the direction the team was given, but where it occurred in that life cycle, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Next, please. Next, please. So we wanted to not bury the lead. So we wanted to provide a quick executive summary at the high level. So if we take a look at the Churchill, there was already a selection of an LPA with 2 backups. And so 2 of those are viable and 1 of them less so. So on the locally preferred alternative, the Kellogg undercrossing, there's some minor adjustments to Alma Street. They had about a 5-foot encroachment. We can accommodate about a 3-foot encroachment. There is the bikeway on the west side that encroached significantly into the Caltrain right of way. And that's the narrow side of the tracks, and we could not accommodate that. And so taking the pathway that's on the west side and it needs to stay within the 25-foot that's available today, or move it farther to the west, or potentially relocate that to another location. And I think staff is wandering around that question. Rippon, Philip?
Yeah, well, so if you're referring to Kellogg versus Seal, we are planning to bring a report on that next rail committee meeting next month.
And so in terms of the closure option with mitigation, there we could only accommodate a 3-foot encroachment on the Alma Street side, and they had showed putting the entire pathway in our right of way, which we couldn't accommodate. And so if we can only accommodate a 3-foot encroachment, that would make that pathway only 7 feet wide, which is pretty narrow for a 2-way bike and pedestrian path. So if it was going to be wider, it would encroach into the Alma Street. And so we found that would only be moderately viable. And option 2, Caltrain had no comments on. Next, please. So now moving over to the Meadow Charleston, we found all of 3 of these to be viable. And so the hybrid was viable with some refinements. We found the viaduct was viable, but when we did a little bit deeper dive, we came into some understanding about where that viaduct and approach structure would be in terms of its footprint in Alma Street for both the viaduct and the approach structure. And I think that's material to the decision-making. Want to make sure we share information on that. And we found that the underpass, of course, was viable with some refinements. And there's also the trench alternative.
For the trench alternative, as we have previously discussed, that the flow tracking requirements and the requirements for the flow tracking and the trench would be, cost prohibitive and also constructability wise, it has the challenges. So that was previously asked by Rail Committee not to pursue additional reviews and kind of on hold. So we'll seek further based on that directions from the Rail Committee. And thank you.
Okay, so next, please. So we're going to walk through a little bit more of the details. The presentation to the staff on this was a much longer PowerPoint slide deck, so we tried to trim it some to have just a couple of slides for each of the items. So we're going to go next, please. So first, we're going to hit the Churchill, the LPA next. So we start off with looking at the illustration that was provided and tried to walk through our comments, and then we'll see where there's a section view that might be helpful that illustrates the same items, and then at a plan view to look at in plan view. So I know there's a lot of words on this screen. I'm going to kind of start at the upper right and work my way around clockwise. So the first note there is, of course, is track centers at 15 foot on center, which is the standard today. And then that bridge width. If we take a look, this segment is about 3/4 of a mile long. And there'd be an access at one end and an access on the other end. So as we're trying to drive along next to the railroad tracks to do our inspection, how do we do that with Churchill being in about the middle? Do we need to drive on both sides of those? No, let's just make sure we can just drive on one side. And so the notion there is provide a 12.5 foot from the center line of track on the west side. That's a 7.5 foot offset from the train to the center of track. That's the train's operating envelope. And then 5 feet for kind of emergency egress in order to get people off a train that might be disabled. So on the west side, that's providing enough width for a 5 foot emergency egress path. So that's what that note's about. And then you heard me talk about couldn't accommodate any further encroachment on that west side, the next note. That is the 25 foot wide Embarcadero bike path that exists today. And so what we're saying is you'd still need to be inside that footprint. This is a narrow section of a right of way. We couldn't accommodate additional encroachment on that side.
Rob, just a quick technical question.
Yep.
Your nomenclature clearly includes red and blue differentiating something. What is that?
The red is more of kind of property easements, where the blue is more engineering. So you'll see on the other side, it says 3 foot minimum encroachment. So those has to do more with property rights. The other are more engineering. So then the next note is just saying remaining in a 25 foot existing easement if you're going to do a bike path in the area. And then it says that existing easement's expired. And as part of the project, we would refresh that. And then if we look at the note, the next note, it says interior of the bridge is accommodated 25 foot offset. That's the center track to center of OCS pole of 13 feet, 2 feet for the width of the foundation, half the width. And then that 10 foot travel lane that's been a requirement since 2003 is where that 25 foot, it's only on one side. We selected it only on the Alma Street side because we didn't want it to impact the profile of the road and increase the impact to local properties. If we'd put that on the other side, it would impact property. So we put it on the Alma Street side because it doesn't impact properties. But it still allowed us to drive that 3/4 of a mile as opposed to get to a dead end and turn around and come back and then dead end and turn around and come back to make that wider. And then the last note there is that maximum encroachment of 3 feet appears to be viable. So this taking a look at where the tracks are at, where the OCS poles along Alma Street, looks like we could accommodate a 3-foot encroachment and still make that work. It did show a 5-foot encroachment, but we think we can make 3-foot work. So next, please. So this is taking a look at the undercrossing at Churchill. And there's a note there that talks about, again, starting at the top, working my way around counterclockwise, making sure we stay within the existing 25-foot easement for the Embarcadero path. Then it talks about the 15'6" vertical clearance. That's what we used to have. We want to go to 16'6", but we realize here that would provide more impact to the community. Could accommodate the 15'6" with a sacrificial beam and an agreement. The other thing that was shown at this location was pushing into the Caltrain right of way to accommodate vehicle turning movements. And on this side of the right of way, we could only accommodate 3 foot, and it was showing an extensive encroachment that we couldn't accommodate. So we looked for a way to, how else can we solve that? We lost the.
Sorry, she's pulling up the PowerPoint rather than that, because you have some animations in the next slides. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So we were looking for a way to help solve that. And so we looked at, can we make the opening longer? Can we make the bridge longer and accommodate those turning movements? And we worked with AECom, Palo Alto's design consultant that said we could make, if you made the bridge longer, that would accommodate those turning movements, and then we wouldn't encroach into your right of way that you can't accommodate. So that was kind of the creative engineering solution. How can we make sure we don't impact property owners by going more than 15'6", and how can we make sure we don't encroach more into Caltrain's right of way where it can't accommodate it and still allow the turning movements that are necessary for emergency vehicles and others on the road network. So this was a creative solution for that.
I have a question on a couple places. It notes that where the bike path encroachment or this prospective encroachment for the eastbound right turn from Churchill is subject to appraisal and annual fee. Does the city currently pay for the bike path encroachment and for the encroachment that we currently have of southbound Alma onto Churchill?
And so I believe the encroachment for the Embarcadero, that agreement has expired. So
Embarcadero?
The Embarcadero as bikeway,
Oh, the bikeway you're talking about.
that has
No, but
expired.
my question is, before it expired, were we paying for that encroachment?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So no, historically, we have not.
Right.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you all. I think when you push it, it would go on, but it doesn't always do that. So no, historically, we have not paid for it. However, as we've been engaged in conversations with Caltrain, we have received the request to pay.
And we have not paid for the Alma right turn encroachment either or elsewhere. So
No.
so as we at Caltrain have said, we now have a commitment to a corridor-wide strategy and a partnership with the cities. The partnership means that we'll start charging cities for the encroachments when we didn't do so, when we didn't have a partnership. I don't know if we want the partnership.
So what staff is trying to communicate is the board established a policy, and the policy said that for uses of the right of way that are semi-permanent, that the board directed staff to get an appraisal and go to the board to establish, to have a fee schedule. But the board has the ability to say that for this particular use, they get to establish whether there's a price or not. What staff is communicating, here's the board policy that was established and here's what it says,
Okay.
but it's a board level decision.
And remind me the sequence of when that policy was created. When was that policy created?
So, yeah, that policy has been around, what's that?
Yes,
The conveyance policy.
it's since April of 2021.
Well, and there was one that was, the first conveyance policy was in 2010, and then the board, updated in 2021.
Okay. Well, I'll just say this is something I'm going to be interested in taking to the board because we really have to reconcile what we are now committed to
Yep.
as a partnership with cities versus policies that are less partnering than we had historically had.
But you can imagine the policy is for the entire right of way. And that there's nuances, and which is why the board left it for their guidance. So we're just, here's what the board had said, but obviously this is a partnership project.
Yep. And we'll see it later slides where we have needs for encroachment onto city streets and things like that. And
Right.
it's not, it needs to be a two-way street.
I understand.
Okay.
But the intent of this slide here was to say that originally there was a solution that didn't meet the needs of the railroad. We wanted to make sure that we could provide that creative engineering solution. Well, we will move the wall over here. We'll make the bridge a little longer. We'll do some sacrificial beams. We won't change this. How can we find that art of the possible that still keeps the intent of the design, but accommodates the needs of both to the minimum extent possible? Next, please. So this is just the cross section, shows the same sort of information. The cross section at the top, shows the 12.5 feet on the one side, which is the 7.5 foot clearance envelope for the train and a 5 foot for emergency egress. And then the 25 foot on the other side, which is accommodating the OCS poles and the 10 feet. The section on the bottom shows that 3 foot encroachment into the right of way. Originally it was 5 feet, so we said we can accommodate 3. Looks like that might be able to work with that cross section that's there, still makes that viable. And then on the other side, on the left side, that blue line is the existing fence line, and those trains are actually a lot closer than was illustrated, and we really can't accommodate any further encroachment there from where the OCS poles and the train are at. That's pretty tight side of the right of way. Next, please. And this is just a plan view showing the same thing, if that's easier to understand. It has the same notes, just in a plan level view. Next, please. The closure option with mitigation. Next, please. So here, if we start at the top and go clockwise, on the Alma Street side, the current plan shows the full width of that bike and ped ramp inside Caltrain's right of way, and we couldn't accommodate that. We could only accommodate 3 feet at that location. So that would move that ramp over into the Alma Street. If you're going to keep Alma Street as it is, that would mean the ramp would only be 7 feet wide, which is pretty suboptimal. And so if you're going to make it wider, it would impact the travel lane on Alma. On the moving to the west side, the bottom part of the plan view, this was that location. Because of the location of the track and the OCS, we could not accommodate any additional encroachment. But we did suggest if you're going to put a ramp at this side, you'd make it more, you'd flip its location and make it more to the bottom part of the page to get it away from the OCS poles to make it more constructible. And of course, would have the tunnel be the full width of the right of way, similar to what was done for the Middle Avenue undercrossing in Menlo Park. But this one was a little less viable because of that east side pathway. The next one was the closure option with mitigations, and Caltrain had no comments on that. It appeared to be viable just as it was shown. No, that,
Sorry, I'm new. What is the difference between option one and option two?
you want to do it?
So the Churchill, it's the crossing along the Churchill, underneath both Elmer tracks and the railroad tracks. So it's perpendicular to the railroad tracks in the middle of Churchill Avenue.
So it would close Churchill. That's
It's right in, right out.
And
Sorry, just to note that closure option 2 with mitigations was the one that was preferred. The preferred alternative as the backup option.
among
Yeah.
closures.
Yeah, among closures. So it's the backup option to the partial underpass. But the closure option 2 with mitigations was the preferred backup option.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a closure option with right in, right out on the each leg only. Correct.
And moving on to moving south to Meadow Charleston, starting with the hybrid. Again, starting with the top and working around clockwise. This starts with there's a right-of-way jog at Meadow. And so that's material to where you place the tracks. So the first note there is the tracks be aligned as far west as possible at the very southern portion because of that jog. So we'll have more slides on that a little later, but that's kind of where you started. Where do you put the tracks? And let's start there first. And then realizing there's residences there. And Caltrain wants to maintain the utility of its width of its right of way, but we don't want to put walls at the property line of residential, because then how do you inspect the wall without going in people's property? So we said we'd move the wall 10 feet away from the property line. So we'd have a access path to inspect and maintain the wall. So that wall would be 10 foot away from the property line of the residences to minimize any impact to the residents. The next note has to do with the temporary wall, and we'll explain that a little bit more with the cross section. And then we talked about that 16'6" versus 15'6" before. And so that's just the same note. And then we talked a little bit about the retaining wall on the other side would be at the Alma Street property line, and there might be an opportunity when we need to inspect that, and we'd have to get a permit from the city, and we'd look for that permit at a no cost like we do at other jurisdictions. Next, please. So this is a cross section, and it's important to understand that the shoe fly that is shown here actually ends up being in Alma Street travel lanes during construction when you do the math. So we wanted to help illustrate that. Next, please. Next, please. There we go. And then in the final condition, when you've got the west retaining wall 10 feet from the property line, then you've got the permanent track for the hybrid, and then you've got the eastern wall at the Alma Street right of way. Then you fill in between those so we can continue to inspect our tracks and have full utility. Now, you heard me talk about that offset at Meadow, and it has implications. On one side, it's 100 feet wide. On the other side, it's 95 feet wide. So it jogs. On one side, there's a 20-foot jog, and the other side, a 15-foot jog. And so that's material in terms of how you lay out the track and the implications of that. So we have a little bit of a slide deck for that. Next. So this is a plan view looking at existing conditions. You can see main track 1 and main track 2 there today. Next, please. So you want to build your shoe fly along Alma Street. Now this shows a 25-foot clearance between the centers of track. It's important to understand that the service disconnects. It's like if you're going to do a remodel in your kitchen, you turn off the circuit breaker. So when you're working on your appliances in your kitchen, you're safe. So the service disconnects for this section of track occur at Menlo Park Station and San Antonio Station. They're 4.1 miles apart. So when you go to flip the circuit breaker to shut this section down, you shut down 4.1 miles. Okay. And so you want to make sure when you go to do that construction, you do it efficiently. So this shows a 25-foot offset that allows the trains to keep running because it shuts down those busy stations that we talked about earlier. And know that the last southbound train passed San Antonio and the first northbound train that comes in San Antonio, when you do the math of where we are today, during the weekdays, it gives you about 3 hours and 39 minutes. But it takes a half hour to shut down the system and a half hour to turn it back on. So you only have about a 2 hour and 39-minute window to do work. Now on the weekends, you've got about 5.5 hours. And so if you're closer to that electrified line, you can't work all the time. So this says, in order to work all the time, let's get 25 feet away. Could it be 20? Is there some flexibility there? We could do that during preliminary engineering. But it said, let's start with 25, because that way you could work full time, right? The trains could be going, you don't need to shut it down. You don't have those limited work windows. So that's why the first one was that 25-foot clearance. And that's the why for constructability and cost-effective construction. Next, please. So then you'd build those shoe fly tracks. Next, please. And while you're building those shoe fly tracks, you've got a construction zone. So that would narrow the width of Alma Street during the construction of the shoe fly as shown there. So you'd have a couple of travel lanes during the construction of the shoe fly. Next, please. And there's just the dimensions, right? It's providing, just the minimum width you need on the one side to provide that emergency access, and just enough to get a vehicle by for an inspection on the other side. But, we could look at that during PE if there's a way to make that any smaller. Next, please. And so that's the width that we have right now at 45 feet. You'll see that dimension later on on a illustration. Next, please. So then you go and you build your main track 1, main track 2. That's a new track for the hybrid. Next, please. The next phase is removing the shoe flies. We've got the new tracks are up and running. They're on the elevated tracks, and you're moving those shoe flies. Next, please. Now you're preparing to do the last phase, which is to fill in between the retaining wall at the property line and the other structure. Next. And then you fill that in, and then the last slide. And then you've got one more. And there's the final condition. So that kind of walk through, but there's yes.
I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that main track 1 and 2 moved closer down.
Yes.
And I don't know if you can go back to where that happened so
Okay.
that they can understand that, because I think that's very important for the
Material.
public to get.
Go back one more. Keep going. One more. Keep going. So if you see, there's MT1 and 2, and then if you cycle through, you'll see that they've moved down. You see where the existing tracks are in the aerial and where the new tracks are overlaid to that. But
Have you said why that's necessary?
Edgar? Edgar, can you explain why that's necessary?
Yes, it deals with the jog in the right of way that Rob had demonstrated or shown in an earlier slide. As the jog occurs, having the tracks as far west as possible allows for two things. One, the constructability on the south side of Meadow. And second, on the north side of Meadow is the beginning of the 4-track segment as part of the adopted service vision moderate growth. And so it allows for the future implementation of 4 tracks.
And at its full height, the height of the berm is what? Do we recall?
I believe in the concepts from the city, it was 15 feet max.
So I just want to make sure everybody realizes when we have talked about the hybrid option going back several years, it was often described as, well, the tracks go up a little and the underpass goes down a little. And for those of us who, I had a company 200 yards from San Carlos tracks, the hybrid doesn't feel like a hybrid. It feels like a fully elevated berm. And now that berm is going to be 15-foot earthen wall, just a few feet from the back fences of all those homes. So just want to make sure everybody understands the implications of this change.
Next, please. So if we can go to the, keep going. There we are. So we thought it would be important in order to try to illustrate the impact to Alma Street during construction. You know, we took a look at the jog, took a look where the track needs to be and how you would build it efficiently and what that resulted in. So we wanted to illustrate that. So you can see here, Nadia, to your point, the blue MT1, MT2 that says existing, and then the green MT1, MT2 are in the final. You can see they've shifted towards the west. And then you can see that 25-foot clearance I talked about that had to do with making sure you could build the thing efficiently. Now, can you move that over closer to non-impact Alma and be less efficient during construction? Those are PE discussions. And then you see that 45-foot dimension. You saw that on the plan view. That's the width of the shoe fly tracks. And then the pink is just the temporary construction zone during the construction of the shoe fly. And that goes away when the shoe fly is built and you're off building the hybrid on the right-hand side of the slide.
Note in this picture, to the west side of the tracks, looks like we have a picture from 70 years ago when we used to have fields there, not homes. So I would just suggest that actually we get something that gets people having a more realistic sense of what it will be.
Appreciate that.
And I'll also note that just this rendering, you don't get any sense of the elevation of the tracks.
No, this was just this was trying to illustrate.
I get it, but
Yep.
people are going to look at it and perceive certain things.
Right.
I think colloquially, the way we thought about it was when you look at when the arm is the gates are up at Meadow and Charleston, if you're sitting in your car, the top of the arm is about as high as the viaduct. I mean, sorry, as the hybrid would be. That's the equivalent. Huh, no, the bottom of the hybrid. Then on top of that, you have train, tracks, wires, poles.
Yeah.
The extra.
And the wires are 22 feet above the track.
Yeah.
Next, please. So this is just a plan view that has many of the same comments that we've already gone through, but for those that think better in a plan view, we provided those. It has the same sort of things about where the walls are at, those sorts of things, the track alignment, bridge clearances. So next, please. And with Charleston Road, it has the same sort of comments we've gone over before, but just in a plan view. Next, please. Moving on to the viaduct. Now, with the viaduct, it's important to note that the intent, that at least that I understand, was the viaduct endeavored to utilize the existing Caltrain tracks as a shoe fly to save time and money. You don't need to build a shoe fly, use the existing tracks. You get right on to building the viaduct. Could be built faster, less impact during construction. So, but as you've heard me say that the details matter. And so we did a little bit of a deeper dive, revealed that the viaduct may have a permanent encroachment into Alma Street based on the sequencing plan. And so what we're trying to illustrate there is that blue box is the approach structure. This is where the tracks are going up into space. And at what distance do you actually have enough clearance to go underneath the viaduct? And on the north of Meadow, it's about 2,000 feet long of that approach structure. South of Charleston, it's about 1,600 feet long. So those approach structures are not small. They're pretty good length. So now, obviously, when we did our analysis, I said, wow, that structure is in Alma Street. Could we, during PE, take a look at maybe if we're gonna have to build a viaduct, build a shoe fly, could we maybe flip it and build a shoe fly in Alma, since you've got to build a shoe fly most likely anyway, and build the viaduct over Caltrain right away, similar to what Redwood City is doing. And then you wouldn't have that permanent impact to Alma. But that's not what we explored. We were evaluating what we saw. And what we saw was, that has an impact. We should make sure everyone is aware of that. But in PE, if this is advanced, we could take a look at other creative ways to build the shoe fly that might not have a permanent impact in Alma. So I just wanted to lay that out there as here's what we saw, here's the implications, but that's not the end of the conversation. That's the start of creative thinking. Next, please. So this is the same as you saw before. This is the existing conditions that we see today. And you see main track 1, main track 2. Next, please. So there's about 49.5 feet to the property line from MT1 to the property line at Alma. Next, please. So again, that 25-foot offset that we talked about, remember those 2 hours and 39 minutes of actual work window, if you're not about 25 feet away, or 5.5 hours on a weekend. So let's get away from it so we can work full time. Next, please. So the viaduct is about 52 feet wide from out to out. So that gives you the room for track centers, from track to pole, from pole to track is about 26 feet. Then you got 7.5 feet on either side for the train clearance, and then the 5 foot for the emergency egress. You add all those up, it's about 51 feet, and then a half a foot for the structure to get to the 52. So that's the width of the structure. So you can see, next please. You can see that really gets pretty into Alma Street, and that's that approach structure that are 1,600 feet long and 2,000 feet long. Those structures are in there forever. So we went, that's probably not what the city intended. So let's look for a creative solution. So the first solution we looked at was, next please. What if we said, okay, here's what's there today. What if we created added one track as a shoe fly? So next please. Said, okay, let's build a shoe fly over towards the property owner side for temporarily as a shoe fly. Next, please. Then remove decommission MT1. And now you've got that whole thing shifted about 13 feet to the west. And so now you're building the viaduct, but you're no longer as impactful into the street. So next, please. And so that's the final condition. So you've heard me talk about impact to Alma Street. So what does that mean? So without a shoe fly, you're about, remember the right-of-way shifts in Meadow Street. So if you look at to the south of Meadow, we've got a 100-foot right-of-way. You're about 27.5 feet into the Alma Street right-of-way. Now that location has about an 8-foot shoulder, so you're about 19.5 feet into the travel lanes. Now north, the right-of-way shifts, but you still have that same impact because the road doesn't shift. The right-of-way line shifts, but Alma Street keeps on going. So you still have about 19.5 feet of travel lanes. Now, if you do the shoe fly let's get a little better. Let's get in a shoe fly. With that, the impact is about 6.5 feet into that travel lane. Now, during preliminary engineering and final design, could you find ways to maybe make that not 6.5 feet, but make it not impact Alma Street travel lanes, but it would still be in Alma Street right of way. Unless you flipped it on its head and said, let's do the shoe fly out in Alma, like we're doing the hybrid, and build a viaduct over the property. But that's when we weren't charged to look at that. But when we did the analysis here, it was like, I don't think folks understood that until we did the homework. So we thought that might be material to decision making to understand. We tried to be creative with what we saw, but it's still a pretty good impact. But it's not the end of the story. It's the part of creative problem solving. But we wanted to highlight that.
So you're saying
Questions?
that the flip that you just said, hey, wait a minute, there may be a problem with what was proposed, but we could flip it, create a shoe fly on Alma. It's the same type of shoe fly as exists with the hybrid.
Yes.
Okay.
And we haven't analyzed that. That's just me thinking out loud, and it required a lot of help from a lot of engineers and others. But taking a look at what we saw today, we thought it was important to communicate what we found. And it would be material to decision making. If the decision was to move forward with the viaduct, it was predicated on not building a shoe fly. But the results of that are impactful. So to minimize and avoid those impacts, you might have to build a shoe fly to avoid those impacts. But those are choices. Questions that make sense? So this is just that same illustration that all the buildings look flat. But it does show shoe fly 1 is an existing track, and shoe fly 2 we'd build, and the 25-foot clearance and the new MT1 and MT2. You can see it's that approach structure, even with shifting, is still in Alma Street travel lanes a good amount. So, and that's even with trying to be creative with adding a shoe fly. Next, please. And these are the dimensions you heard me talk about, the 47.5 feet, and the 1,600 feet and the 2,000 feet. Realizing that the structure type that's there for the viaduct would need refinement during preliminary engineering final design. Do you put the OCS poles in the middle? Do you put it to one side? There's a lot of engineering yet to go with that. Next, please. Yeah, just the north and south views. Next, please. So now we're moving on to just the illustrated view of that, and that just says that the viaduct would be over and on Alma Street. And of course, the feedback I got back from our exec is that if we did build those shoe flies on the Caltrain right of way, that's a heavy investment of public funds, and we'd want to retain those for future railroad purposes. If you're going to spend millions of dollars building electrified tracks, they have utility. We'd use them as a siding, as we use the viaduct. So she wanted to be clear that if we were going to build it that way, we'd want to keep them. And I know it wouldn't be for everyday traffic, but we have needs for putting things on electrified sidings in order to stage and doing maintenance and other things. We wouldn't want to lose that investment the public put in. Next, please. Underpass. On to the last one.
Let me just make sure I understand that last point. Going with the viaducts situation you studied, the existing tracks would be the shoe fly.
Yep.
To save time and money. Viaduct comes out and then they become this siding track.
Yes.
Which means like a permanent, not a shoe fly. The existing tracks go from existing to shoe fly to permanent for other use.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
if you do that flip thing you talked about, there isn't that. The viaduct ends up on top of the Caltrain, in the Caltrain right away as we currently think of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, looking at the illustrative, working at the from the top right, going clockwise, you heard me talk about the access. The access for this location, they're about 1.8 miles apart. So because of the way this is constructed, you get access about a mile north of Meadow and about a half a mile south of Charleston. And so in order to maintain access, we wanted to provide those 12.5 feet on the private property side for emergency egress, because we don't want to impact the road profile and have additional property impacts. And we need access on the Alma Street side in order to take an emergency vehicle, maintenance vehicles up and down that 1.8 miles. But we don't need it on both sides. So we put a maintenance vehicle crossover. That's an asphalt crossover, right? Between the tracks, you put asphalt, you drive across it. That way you don't need a wider bridge on both sides, but only on one side. And then on the side that's away from the residences. So you're driving those maintenance vehicles on the other side away from the residences. So this just says provide those maintenance overcrossings. We did note that that pedestrian bridge had a vertical clearance the same as the railroad bridge, and typically those bridges are a little higher because the users are more vulnerable. That was our engineers, if you see something, say something. Track centers at 15 feet. Again, we'd be shifting the track to the west like we talked about because of the jog in the right of way. Of course, the OCS poles in this illustration are shown a little too close. Obviously, the fence wouldn't be up against the trains. They'd be at the our right of way line. And there's shown a use of a bus pullout. That'd be a revocable license agreement, and the board would establish what the cost for that is, not staff, but next, please. And this is just a cross section showing those same sort of things with the 12.5, 25, providing the crossovers, the vertical clearance, 15'6" is okay with a variance and an agreement. So we don't blow up the world. Next, please. This is just a plan view with the same information for those that, that's a better way to see it. Next, please. This is at Charleston. It has the same sort of information, same sort of things at that crossing that we saw at Meadow. Same sort of solutions that try to minimize any additional impact, to try to provide just enough to continue to maintain the facility and allow the existing solution to move forward, which is some minor adjustments. Next, please. Same cross section with the same information. Next. And then a plan view for those that it's easier to read in a plan view. Same information. And that's the presentation. Next steps.
And
Back to
I'm
city
sorry,
staff.
a question on the bus pullout. We don't currently have a bus line that travels there, I don't think. We do? Oh,
Yeah.
Which one?
There's a stop along Alma. We didn't notice it when we did XCAP. We caught it later. And so with staff, we talked about the potential of having to figure out where that might move to.
Okay.
Obviously have to be a negotiation with VTA.
And what, right now, how does the bus pull out?
The bus literally pulls over a little bit on Alma. People get on and it off, and then it just pulls back out.
Okay, thanks.
It just wasn't clear from the drawings whether that was gonna keep it or remove it.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, I just hadn't appreciated that. Thank you.
Sorry, and this is just a landing page for us to, I guess, for any questions about the next steps, but it's the same slide that presented earlier. So I guess turn it over for discussion or public comments or wherever you'd like to go.
So why don't we go ahead and go to public comments right now, and then we can come back with committee questions and comments.
Sorry, one moment, please.
Yep.
All right, our first public speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to comment on the widened bridges to allow rubber tired maintenance vehicles to drive alongside the tracks. I think this is a very new requirement. It's not customary around the world on electrified or regular diesel railroads to make bridges for cost reasons wide enough for the luxury of driving maintenance vehicles, rubber-tired maintenance vehicles alongside the tracks. On the Caltrain line itself, there are numerous places where recent projects have been done where there's no such facility, such as the high-speed rail partially funded 25th Avenue grade separation and new station at Hillsdale. There's no such facility there. The Guadalupe Bridge replacement going on right now in San Jose is not providing that kind of facility that I know of. I could be mistaken, but I haven't seen it. And I know the Gerald Bridge replacement up in San Francisco, most of the line from Redwood City north is not available. It's up on a berm through San Carlos, Belmont, etc., where the only way to inspect those tracks, and I see them doing it all the time, is just like other railroads do all over the world from a high rail truck. And so I just think that this is it seems like a new, onerous, and somewhat luxurious ask on Caltrain's behalf at others' expense. So I understand that it's nice to have, but it's clearly not necessary, or there'd be major problems with the existing line if it were. So the other question I had was, it's not at all clear to me why the viaduct alternative appears to be the only one that will leave the existing tracks at grade, which implies there will still be crossing gates. And that's a complete mystery. If it was touched on, I must have missed it. But it does not make sense to me. The whole point of doing grade seps is to get the trains up and out of the way of life and out of the way of people using the streets. The other question I had was just having to do with using structures. I think Rob mentioned it, using structures that are thinner through trusses or U-shaped viaducts and bridges, so that the train doesn't have to be quite as high up in the air, or the roads don't have to dip quite as deeply. And then it wasn't clear if Rob mentioned this, but what are the grades being used for the approaches, the maximum grades, and the freight train, the maximum freight train speeds, which drive the vertical curve lengths and the length of the approaches. So those are sort of technical details. But overall, my impression is that this thing is a little bit luxurious and overly wide. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Stephen.
Good afternoon, members of the Caltrain and Rail Committee. My name is Stephen Rosenblum. I live in Palo Alto, and I'm quite disappointed in this presentation. Caltrain's implying that the whole idea of the crossings has just begun in January, when in fact we've had a rail committee in existence since 2016. And we've been asking for this information from Caltrain quite regularly over that time period, and have gotten absolutely nothing back in return until now, when they've come to the table with a list of demands like a bunch of spoiled children at Christmas asking Santa Claus for gifts that they don't have to pay for. I think Caltrain needs to have more humility and look back at their mission statement, which is a customer-focused rail system offering safe, reliable, and sustainable transportation service that enhances the quality of life for all. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that at all. All I heard was property rights and preservation of right-of-way and encroachments on the right-of-way. What about the people who use Caltrain who aren't riding it all the time, that need to get across the tracks, that need to walk and bike and use bicycles and wheelchairs? How are they supposed to get across the tracks? And then the question that Adrian raised, why do they need 4 tracks only in the case of a viaduct? Just because they had to pay for it. It's like, well, as long as you pay for it, it's okay if the money is thrown down the drain. But once we pay for it, well, of course, we're going to hang on to it, and no question about that. I really don't understand this sort of superficial message of cooperation, which seems to me more like passive aggression, where they're telling us, oh, we want to cooperate, but you have to do it our way. I don't see any evidence of cooperation here. All I see is a bunch of demands which are difficult to meet and completely neglect a lot of the work that's been done. For example, the viaduct that was proposed was built on the existing Caltrain right-of-way, as opposed to out on Alma Street. And at that point, didn't even require shoe fly tracks. All of a sudden, we now need shoe fly tracks, and that Caltrain wants to build and won't even be removed. I find this totally offensive, actually. And if I were the council, I would say we're not interested in negotiating anymore. We're just going to leave the crossings the way they are. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cedric.
Hey, good afternoon, council and Caltrans Caltrain representatives, staff. Thanks for having this meeting. Yeah, I was dismayed to see as well the enormous widening of the berm for the hybrid. I mean, that's not the option that I have been supporting, but it definitely has a large impact. Basically double wide double wide raised hybrid that would basically eliminate all the trees on the edge of Alma. I think that would be quite unfortunate. I do support the viaduct still. It seems what I'm hearing, what I'm reading is that if the viaduct is overhanging Alma in some places, that there are support structures that would allow for that, but we'd have to see if those are feasible. I would appreciate Caltrain giving some initial, you said, maybe in the preliminary engineering phases that there might be, or I assume that's what you mean by PE, ways to shrink the encroachment further. I think it'd be nice to know, kind of a range of how tight you think it might be squeezable, before we, get to the point of actually deciding what to do. It'd be helpful information for the city to know, how tight can we get this? And I do appreciate, Caltrain reviewing these things and finding issues and trying to explore creative alternatives. I hope that we'll continue to look at creative alternatives in order to make this happen. I think there may be some impacts to Alma. We need to try to minimize those things, but at least, for instance, compared to the one with the big roundabout, which has huge property acquisitions and all sorts of other impacts beyond Caltrain, but people losing homes and yards. I think that's a pretty huge hit. I'm also dismayed by this saying that, I understand the desire to keep infrastructure, but it's also unfortunate that, that sort of perhaps blocks where we might do some plantings to buffer the homes from the viaduct to help hide the structure. I don't know if there's still anywhere where, would there still be space that we could put that green space. And then finally, on the case where you mentioned a 10-foot distance from the back of the property line to a fence, at least one of the options had that. Maybe that 10-foot access space could be also used for the public right of way to have a bike path that might occasionally be obstructed by maintenance. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eric Nordman.
Yes, I just had two short comments. These are more really for perhaps the future and for Caltrain. First of all, the jogs in the right of way seem to be historical artifacts and don't really make sense for a rail. And so that you might want to consider sort of doing property swaps rather than perpetuating these jogs. And the final comment had to do with powering off of lines and the difficulty of doing maintenance in short windows, and that if you had some level of batteries in the trains, you could sort of go through a short section and do that. I know that there were sort of some of the trains that were being ordered, I think for Gilroy were going to be electrical, and that looking forward, that making all the trains sort of at least mildly electrical short distances could give you a good good maintenance option. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tony Carrasco.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tony Carrasco and I live in Palo Alto. I have been working in planning and designing cities for over 40 years. And what's really clearly evident is this movement from prioritizing fast movements to prioritizing slow movements. And so in this regard, I know these are complicated details, but it sounds like we are talking all about the train rather than pedestrians and bikes. And our comprehensive plan in many sections talk about prioritizing bikes and pedestrians, especially the disabled. And so in that regard, the most flat surface you can get is the ground plane, and that should be reserved for humans, in my opinion, humans in wheelchairs, by walking, and on bikes. So thank you.
Our final speaker is Penny Elson.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Penny.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So I guess I have one primary comment for Caltrain, which is I'm a user of Caltrain who usually bikes to the station. And to do that, no matter which station I go to, I have to cross the train tracks. So I hope that you will be thinking about the easements that I use to get there, and consider that those easements serve you as well as our community. It serves your customers who need to get to your stations. So that's thing number one. And I completely concur, as an aging Palo Alto resident, I completely concur with the previous speaker, Tony Carrasco. And then I was a little surprised by the tone of the discussion around easements and payments, and the attitude that all of that reflects in this presentation. I hope Caltrain will take some time to think about what partnership means. And I think that and I hope that our council will be looking at things that they're asking for as well. I think there are some possible trades here. Both sides have valuable right-of-way, and both sides have something to share. So, you know, that kind of negotiation is a two-way street. And as you enter in, it's always important to enter a negotiation in partnership, in true partnership, and better not to start in such a, what's the word I want? It felt like a very strong language used in this presentation. So again, I just want to say, I would ask you to please take a more careful look at the pedestrian and bicycle components of this plan, and think about how they serve Caltrain. As a user of Caltrain, I just need you to know that every one of my trips on the tracks starts on a bicycle. Thank you.
And we have one more speaker, Phil Burton. Mr. Burton?
I've been unmuted by accident. I'm Adrian Brandt. Sorry.
Oh. Mr. Burton, you are unmuted, so you should be able to speak if you have public comment. Maybe he has changed his mind. His hand is no longer raised.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, oops, sorry. Is it
I'm
back?
so sorry. Yes, his hand is now raised.
Okay.
Mr. Burton, you should have a prompt asking you to unmute.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. It's my problem system. If you could okay. I just want to comment that in the discussions about shoe fly tracks, that was necessary for those alternatives to require them. In some cases, that was necessitated by the 6-month or longer construction time that the shoe fly tracks needed to adjust for the bridges themselves. However, there's a technique called box jacking, which we did explore during the XCAP meetings. I'm a former XCAP member, by the way, and that's been shown to allow replacement of underpass just over a weekend. And this has been proven in several projects in the United States, notably the third rail installation on the Long Island Railroad, which is the busiest commuter railroad in the United States. And I'm a little disappointed that Caltrain has not even done any, quote, creative thinking or creative engineering about that. Thank you. That's my comment.
And that concludes public comment.
Thank you. So as we go into our own questions and discussion, I want to invite Lou Thompson to join us at the table. I think everybody recalls that Lou is a national and international expert on rail who has advised Caltrain, VTA, and us now, and so we get the benefit of his very deep knowledge as we're discussing these areas. Welcome, Lou. Okay, who would like to start off with questions? Ed?
Were you gonna start?
Oh,
I'll ask you.
all right. Yeah, so Lou, before we get going, any initial thoughts and comments or questions?
No, not really. I think that the presentation's been pretty good. I think you have everything on the table that you need to think about here. My personal opinion all along has been that the least impact and the least cost will be the underpasses. But I understand that the alternatives need to be considered, and so they're on the table.
So, excellent segue. I was going to ask you, given that you're a former consultant to Caltrain, let's pretend you are right now. And in light of some of the discussions we've had here, what would you advise them in terms of, box jacking versus shoe fly and negotiating vis-a-vis the city on fees for right-of-ways and all that?
Well, especially electrified shoe flies are a real pain. They're expensive and they're difficult and they take a lot of time and they involve basically wasting of resources. You don't get much out of it afterward. I would say try to avoid that. The other thing is that if you look at this from Caltrain's point of view, they are charged with making maximum use of their assets. And they're not charged with giving anything away, nor should they. I think the price should be fair, and I think it should be the same for everybody. But I wouldn't argue that they should suddenly decide to give something away.
Okay. I have other questions, but not of him, though.
No, it can be in general.
Okay, yeah, just a couple of overview questions. I would like to get your opinion, because I've heard this before, but this committee in the last, I guess, year hasn't talked much about box jacking. So if you could discuss that as an alternative.
So Caltrain has been actively engaging in the exploration of the use of box jacking One of the projects is a grade separation in Mountain View Castro, where box jacking is the primary alternative, where we've hired a CMGC contractor, construction manager, general contractor, bringing on Petruco, which is a subcontractor that is renowned worldwide doing box jacking, to explore using box jacking on that project. We're also looking as part of our VE analysis for the Scott Street undercrossing, a potential of evaluating the current plan or using box jacking, and on Middle Avenue, engaged in conversations with Menlo Park for box jacking.
But
What that is,
so for us, would you consider that as well?
for the underpass, yes, we would.
Yeah.
And Ed, is what you're getting at, what would be the implications for us of box jack?
And
Yeah,
so
not using that much space and taking that
And
much.
so
time
with
and so on.
box jacking, you essentially, you dig a pit in the ground. You build a concrete box. And then essentially you're pushing the concrete box underneath the railroad tracks. And there's a small excavator in the box that's excavating the dirt as you're pushing the box through. And that way the railroad continues on without interruption. And so it doesn't require tracks out of service. It doesn't require shoe flies. It minimizes the impact to the railroad, which is why it's been used at other places like Long Island Railroad and others. But Caltrain has been actively seeking folks to explore that option for projects on our alignment.
When does it not work? Because it seems like a magic bullet to me.
Well, I would just clarify, it only works for underpasses.
Right.
It's not something that can be done for viaducts or hybrid or rail bridges.
But the details do matter. It depends on the geotech is important. The water table is important. So there are the engineering challenges that still need to be resolved. So that's working the problem, which is part of preliminary engineering final design. But it has been used for a number of years around the world. And we've engaged the experts that have been doing that to explore those on our projects.
Okay, and then in the past, we've talked about this 4-track, which is contingent, I guess, on high-speed rail, and we have to provide for that. Is that a fair way to state that?
It's not
Provide for its possibility.
Yeah,
not preclude.
right. So at the point that 6 months from now, state decides that high-speed rail is not coming through anymore, and we've got, let's say 5 years from now, we've got all these extra tracks there. What do we do?
Well, so we're talking about the hybrid option. And if the viaduct option, where there was a shoe fly that was built, and then the viaduct is off partially over the Almond Street right of way.
Mhm.
And those aren't necessarily 4 tracks for the high growth. The notion there is the region has spent an enormous level of money in order to build an asset. That's an electrified asset that has utility for railroad purposes, for siting, to store. Before you go maintain the track in the middle of the night, you stage trains with equipment and materials, and you store them there so you can deploy them in the middle of the alignment versus all the way down at one end or the other. So that facility has utility for the public, and the public spent money building them. So the notion was we spent a lot of money building them. We'd retain the functional utility of that asset in order to allow the efficient operation of the railroad. Not necessarily use them as a 4-track segment, but to use them for other railroad purposes. Since they're an electrified siding, they have value.
Yeah, again, alternative use of assets, I get that. But if we're doing it, if the 4-track is not necessary for high-speed rail, then is necessary, then you can't use it anyway. So then you'd have to, for what you just described, have some other storage facility or something.
Right. So in the 2040 service vision, there's a moderate growth and there's a high growth. Where the moderate growth needed a 4-track segment centered around California Avenue Station,
right,
of about 1.9 miles long.
Mhm.
For the high growth scenario, it needed 4-track through this entire area, but it was relatively impactful down at San Antonio and impactful at the Palo Alto station because of the footprint. And so the keeping that siding isn't related to that 4-track discussion. It's related to the community spent money to build an asset that has utility. To turn around and tear it back out is not necessarily serving the public's best interest. So the notion was we spent a lot of money building it. Why do we turn around and tear it out if it has utility and you can use it? Now, that is a long conversation. I imagine that will happen at the very highest levels of the organizations. The same with the board policy for the fee for the licenses. We're just sharing, here's what the policy is. It's a board level decision. And obviously Caltrain has we want to run the railroad efficiently for the community, but we also want to be a good community partner. We're just saying, here's what the policy says.
Yeah, we got that. Okay, so we're getting to like 10 minutes before the hard stop ends, I think. So, the only, the clock's on our off.
Jeez. Yeah, 15 minutes.
I'm sorry. I wanted to just make sure that I was answering your question though. And I think the question is, what would you do with additional tracks and that space for additional tracks for high-speed rail? If for some reason in 6 months from now,
they aren't needed.
And I think the thing, and this is where from Caltrain's position where we stand is that's a conversation that's going to need to happen if that decision was made. But as of right now, as Rob mentioned in the agreements slide where you saw all of the conveyance policy and the RCUP, there's specific, we have a PMFA with high-speed rail that we're obligated to plan for that blended service of delivering the moderate service vision. Now, if there was a discussion, there's other uses for space because you wouldn't be actually constructing four tracks. When you're building these, you're building and accommodating for that space.
Yeah, you're just leaving the space.
Yeah, and there's use for that space for Caltrain as well, right? And we talked about that through maintenance and some of the discussions we've been having with the actual infrastructure. But as far as the future of high-speed rail, that would have to be a larger conversation that happens. That Caltrain isn't the only one who, we cannot be making decisions at the table regarding if they were not to show up.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I answered that.
Yeah, and I'll just note that Lou does chair the peer review committee for high-speed rail, so there's a little influence there. But on this hard stop, actually, is that for the finance committee? Okay, we don't start till 5:30, so we can't go up to 5:30, but it's not quite a 5 o'clock hard stop then. Okay.
I just wanted to ask then a follow-up question that you might expect me to ask, which is that what is the eminent domain situation with what you described on the respectively on Churchill and Charleston Meadow?
Caltrain does not have eminent domain authority. And so this is a Palo Alto project. And if there's a need for eminent domain, it would be for Palo Alto as the project sponsor's responsibility.
Right.
Now, oftentimes.
I'm just asking how you're impacting houses that are there.
For what
these
designs? I'm
designs.
not sure I understand the question.
Well, and it's our designs.
Yeah.
But then it's their standards that are affecting our designs.
Yeah, in terms of.
So that might be more a question for our staff is how have these standards affected our designs on both what we now have on the vertical clearance being able to go to 15.6 instead of 16.6 if we have a bumper, and given that we don't have to build to the entire right-of-way clearance of 15.6, but we have to accept responsibility if sometime in the future we have to accommodate 4 tracks.
Correct. So at this time, we haven't done that exercise for additional measures that have been asked for, and we can do that exercise, but our intent is to keep it minimum. And that's what we were trying to, as an exercise between Caltrain and city, we were trying to keep that impact to the existing properties that we have previously been already informed the rail committee. So at the last rail committee meeting, we did mention extensively on the impact with different alternatives to the private property owners.
And I left off there that additional bridge width for the maintenance section also affects how far out we go.
Yeah, but that's fine. Perfectly acceptable, Pat, to have staff do that.
Right.
I just wondered if they happen to have done that.
No, we hadn't, but that was a notion of put the maintenance one on the Alma side that wouldn't impact property. And the other one was the minimum needed for emergency egress, but it was a smaller width of just of the 5 feet, but it appeared from the cross sections that wouldn't have impacted additional priority takes.
Yeah, and I know we still have a lot of alternatives
work-
to look at.
a lot of work to
so,
do.
And they have different impacts on that issue, so.
If I can, just really quickly, I just want to note that eminent domain is typically like a last resort following like property negotiations. So
it's called
typically we,
property acquisition and the last resort of that might be eminent domain.
Yeah.
But
right.
it's
So property
acquisition.
negotiations is typically the first. Negotiations, acquisitions, then, yeah.
I think
Matter.
Well, we acquire the property through any of those means. So the ultimate aim is property acquisition.
But I just want to make sure your question was answered. The only alternative that would continue to have imminent, the potential for property acquisition remains the Charleston and Meadow underpass, but none of the technical requirements would cause any eminent domain for the hybrid or viaduct. Everything that could be impacted would actually be the city's right of way of road, but not homes. Did I get that right?
Edgar? I'm gonna ask the engineer, call a friend.
That is accurate. Yes, the property acquisitions were at least identified through the underpass alternatives.
But to note, add to that is that in case if we look at the traffic circulation and if the traffic circulation is impacted, then we would have to understand any additional mitigation measures that would be required, and that could cause for more property impacts elsewhere, probably not on Elm.
Okay, Julie?
Thank you. Appreciate this presentation. Thank you so much. It's really complex, and as the relative newcomer, I'm doing my best to come up to speed and appreciate the extra time Caltrain has taken with me to help tutor me along with my colleagues on staff and Nadia. I am really curious about what you basically said. We were asked to look at this viaduct option that might actually be quicker because we could keep the existing tracks and build the new over here. And then you realized it was going to have such an encroachment on Alma, these unintended consequences. And you weren't asked, you discovered that in the process of preparing for this. So you weren't asked to investigate the opposite, which is flip it. And I'd love to know what would that do for us? Where would that flipped viaduct on top of the existing tracks? I realize you can't necessarily answer on the fly, but if we're trying to consider it, we came into this presentation feeling like, okay, viaduct might be a problem because of its tremendous encroachment into Alma, but now we're hearing, hey, there may be an option of sort of a mirror. And I'm just wondering, what we're supposed to do with, how do we analyze the desirability and viability of that?
There's a time is important here because there's a deadline with the FRA in getting an agreement to move forward. A potential path might be to say, well, we'd like to explore the viaduct more. We'd like to explore the undercrossing more, and we could advance those two to 15% and say, we're going to move those two into preliminary engineering, take them to 15%, do more homework, get to that point, and then make a selection with additional information to support that decision making, as opposed to make one decision today, but provide the technical team the opportunity to do more homework to answer those questions. But that would need to say we're going to advance maybe 2 projects or 2 different alternatives into the next step. It's just an idea that's on the fly here.
Chair, are we just asking questions, or I can make a comment? Okay. I also appreciated the public comments. I think it was Tony Carrasco who spoke of these are complicated details, and we're talking only about the train and not about pedestrians and bikes. And I think Penny Olson was making a similar point. And this phrase of we ought to be preserving the flat plane for humans is something that really resonates with me. I happen to live down at that end of the city, so every time I look at these, I'm picturing, you know, a regular commute and how it'll shift, and change is inevitable and important. And I just want to be sure we're making the change that the future will thank us for instead of curse us for, to the extent that's possible. So let me clarify the prior comment I think Nadia made. She said, property acquisition will come with underpass, but not hybrid or viaduct. Do I have that right? Okay. Um, permanent impact on Alma comes with which of these options?
Edgar, do you want to take that one for me?
It's as conceived by the city concepts, the viaduct would be the one to have the permanent impact to Alma Street travel way, not just the right of way. And then that could be explored further to be able to thin it up during preliminary engineering. The hybrid, as in the concept, was shown with the retaining wall on the property line with Alma, so that does not encroach further into Alma, at least in the permanent condition. There is the shoe fly that goes onto Alma. And then the underpasses, those concepts continue as conceived by the city.
Thank you. And if the sort of aha moment of viaduct being flippable, viaduct ends up on top of the existing tracks, is there some encroachment still into the travel way of Alma or only into the right of way?
The highest likelihood there is that the shoe fly would encroach into Alma Street and not necessarily the permanent condition. At least that's the sort of cursory.
Right. And that's the same shoe fly as exists with the other choices.
That is accurate.
Yeah. And then in terms of changing the residential landscape, I know in a prior presentation, we saw the whole kind of, what do you call it? Lasso, when you're coming and you gotta try to get this way on Meadow, but you gotta go this way first and loop back around. What do we call that? Roundabout, sorry, lasso. Again, I live down there, feels like, okay, you're trying to get here, but first you gotta go there. And the roundabout is a facet of underpass only? Okay.
Underpass at Charleston.
Underpass at Charleston only. Okay, you're allowed to turn on all four directions on Meadow, into Meadow and Alma with an underpass?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not called a roundabout, but
They have to make U-turns.
U-turns, right, U-turns at Alma Plaza. Yeah, which is also quite a change. I guess, you know, I'm searching for the solution that I said the future will thank us for. I think it's important to be loyal to that future. You know, as few impacts as possible on the people that are here, but really designing for what's right for us in the long term. And I guess the final thing I have to say about the viaduct, let's call it viaduct 1, which is what you were asked to study, versus the flip option. Viaduct 1 keeps the shoe fly, and then that becomes siding. That siding is still at grade. So how does that remotely solve? I think one of the commenters made this point. How does that solve one of our, you know, most urgent issues, which is that we no longer have, you know, human pedestrians, cars and bikes crossing at the level of the track?
So it depends on the use of the siding. Oftentimes we use our sidings today. We're building a siding as part of the 25th Avenue project. Used to have a siding that needed to be relocated. That's where the maintenance store equipment for nighttime work. So they're staging it there. So in the middle of the night when they go and they have those limited work windows, they've got the equipment near the job site. So they don't have to travel all the 51 miles to get to where their work is. They put it close by. So they're used more for those sorts of purposes. It's just for maintenance to maintain. It's not using it for everyday travel like we have today. Now, that doesn't mean that if the viaduct was out of service for some reason and you needed to use those tracks because the viaduct was closed for some reason, that the railroad wouldn't use those. But that's not an everyday thing. But the intent would be more for kind of a maintenance. Siting is how we envision it today.
And so if we wanted to consider this flip viaduct, you're suggesting it would be possible in P&E with the 15% of the project being explored, that's where we could really learn more about that option.
Right. It was just because of doing the homework, saying, okay, here's where the tracks are. And you only have 2 hours and 39 minutes. You really can't get really close because then it's going to be extremely expensive to build. So you got to get 25 feet away, and then that puts it in the ALMA. That's not what anyone wants. So if you did a partial siting, it's still in ALMA. So maybe we flip it, but that's a much longer exploration.
I would add, we wanted to remain faithful to the city's original design with the time we had.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I understand that. I'm excited that as you pursued the original request, you discovered something, an unintended consequence, and you're like, okay, now, is there a solution to that?
Right,
And you're
now
like,
what?
yes, flipping it is a solution. I really am grateful for that, frankly. Okay, that's.
Okay, thanks. First, let me follow up on the siting issue, and I want to understand Senator, with the viaduct, whether that's an essential to have, or kind of need to have, or like to have condition.
Sorry, what was the condition?
On the siting, is it essential?
It was the direction the staff was given.
Okay, but we can.
So
But
in-
you can be given things. Get this if you can, or we really need it,
No,
or we really want it, or we
The-
can't operate without it.
the direction in the conversations, the direction was if we spent the money to build the siding, that the railroad would continue to use that siding for railroad purposes to meet its business needs.
So let me turn to Lou. What's your frame of reference
I
on
think
this?
I think it's desirable. I don't
Yeah.
think it's crucial. You do have to have it for the construction process, right?
Yeah.
So that's not avoidable. But do you need it later? I can see why you would like it. I can see why would there be advantages to it.
It's a
But I don't
conversation above my pay grade. Let me put it that way.
Okay, all right.
I think you get my message.
Yeah, well, I do, and that actually appears to answer it. We still need greater clarity, but I think as Lou kind of characterized it, it sounds like it's preferable for Caltrain, but not necessarily essential. So we'll follow up on that. And kind of a similar question on the high rail and the 25th Avenue crossing that recently went in San Mateo. Does that have that additional, 15 feet or whatever it is?
I don't remember the details on that one. We could look it up for you though.
Does anybody else know it? It does not. So
those were built with standards that are 2 generations previous.
Okay, but if up and down the corridor, we have most of the corridor is not going to get rebuilt. So we're going to have much, if not the majority of the corridor that doesn't have this additional access for rubber wheel access. So how does that work in terms of how important it is if we're only going to have it some places? And why do we have to have it, including on a bridge?
So currently today, we can drive up and down the alignment to inspect our facilities. And with the grade separation, we want to maintain that ability to operate and to inspect our facility in an efficient manner. The access points with the configuration that's shown are 1.8 miles apart. And that makes it inefficient for generations to come to maintain that facility. So there's a one-time capital cost to provide that access versus an ongoing increase in maintenance cost forever. So it is an increase in capital cost, but allows us to have the efficient maintenance of and inspection of the facility for those bridges are a 100-year lifespan. So there's a one-time capital cost to make the bridge wider versus an ongoing cost for inefficient maintenance and inspection for 100 years.
But a
So
lot of
it's-
the maintenance that today on our line and other electrified lines is on the rails, right?
We do a lot of inspections where we're walking the rails or riding along the rails to do the inspections.
Yeah, and a
So-
lot of, I mean, electrified systems in Europe and things, they go exclusively on the rails, right? Is
I
that
couldn't
right,
answer
Luke?
that question.
Or
Yeah,
anybody?
I don't think we don't know the answer to that question. I can say that high rail generally is more challenging. It's challenging to service because you can't operate on that track. So this is really a question of, I think, yeah, capital versus operating, short-term versus long-term,
Right.
and there are trade-offs.
If you could imagine a future where you've got going from 4 trains to 6 trains to 8 trains an hour each direction, and you're trying to get on and off the system in between those windows
Yeah.
to do your inspection versus having a access road next to it, there's a difference.
So, but when we say it's capital versus operating, it's the city's capital costs versus Caltrain's operating costs.
Mhm.
Question would be, what choice would Caltrain make if they had to bear the capital costs versus the operating benefit?
Right. And so it's been part of our,
So I'm always,
I-
always good to be able to spend somebody else's dollar.
I hear you. It's been part of the standards for over 20 years, and that's the standard in order to do that. And walking through the conversations with the chief operating officer, the safety officer, engineering, and our executive director. That's where we landed on providing it on one side. It complies with our standards to allow us efficient operation of the railroad. Because those access points are so far apart, it makes it inefficient.
So we're gonna have to figure out how we have that conversation, so we're at the table for the conversation and not just Caltrain internally. Because it's a trade-off. Once again, Caltrain can have these internal conversations, say, you know what, we're gonna save operating dollars if the cities spend an extra $100 million on their capital costs to provide us how much in operating savings. And maybe it is so overwhelming in the operating savings that it's the right call, even if it's not Caltrain's dollars to save Caltrain operating expenses.
Yeah. And if I may, I think what's really important to be and I've heard this in the public comment as well. And I don't want, from just speaking on with my Caltrain hat on, this isn't neglecting the community or in any way or any decision or the standards that we're making and the solutions that we're looking to find, right? It's not without the understanding that these are community investment projects. And I think we're hearing a lot right now is it's Caltrain, what Caltrain wants and what the city wants. And I want to really mitigate that because I actually think that this attempt at this presentation today, this afternoon, was to find an opportunity where we both understand that we are stewards of public funding and we want to use that funding responsibly. And so I don't want to neglect that or lose sight of that in this conversation because we are very considerate. These critical infrastructure projects and funding that Caltrain receives isn't.
And I do want to recognize we've made progress.
Yes.
So, and I think that's a lot of maybe what you're getting at, Navi, is that there are a number of places where Rob and your team have worked through some of the things that a month or 2 months ago were even worse barriers for what we would like to do.
Yep.
So we've made progress. But I still want to zero in on the areas where we still have real tension
Mhm.
and where I think it does boil down to what we have is that Caltrain has operating interests. They can externalize the mitigation costs of that by adding capital costs to the cities. And we you guys have received certain marching orders. We're not sitting down and really negotiating with people who might be able to change those marching orders. And I think, as I'm realizing, to kind of zero in on some of these remaining issues, we may need to do that.
And the other thing, if I could offer, is this is planning level work. When you get into preliminary engineering and final design, and you say, okay, it used to be 10 feet offset from the center line of tracks, so you could drive a vehicle. When you put an OCS pole, it goes to 25. But in this reach, where are the OCS poles? Could you narrow that down because the poles are far enough wide that you could make it narrower because the poles aren't near where the bridge is at? But that's a preliminary engineering analysis to say, how can you optimize the design to minimize the cost of the project? How can you make this structure thinner? How can you build it faster? Evaluate, the construction manager, general contractor to optimize the design part to minimize the construction and the impact. So there's still more homework to do here, but at a planning level, it's like, okay, it needs to be about this wide, and that doesn't increase its footprint, and it still works with the intent, and there's still more homework to do.
Okay, so given that we're at our wrap-up phase, I think I want to just have a couple minutes to talk about what's up with next meeting. Before doing that, I did want to respond to one comment Julie made about, making choices where we won't get cursed at. My belief is we're going to get cursed either way. What we want to do is make the best choices possible and get the fewest curses, not eliminate them. Because every one of these has trade-offs and pros and cons, and we are not going to come up with a perfect solution that's going to make everybody happy. But hopefully we can make most people happy most of the time. Okay.
Can I
yes.
make one last point on that, as building on Rob's? We're trying to show what we perceive as the fullest extent of what impacts could be. I don't want to make promises about what could change, but this is what it could be. We want you to be fully aware when you make your decision. So, as Rob said, that's the beginning of conversations. We're not, we just want that to be understood with the planning level information. So things can change and probably will change in PE.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much.
New here in terms of selecting some more analysis.
So
If I may, I think
yeah.
the real question for staff is if the next study session for the city council is April 22nd or thereabouts, you guys are supposed to try to give action today so that then feeds into the study that happens. If we don't complete the meeting today and it has to be continued, do we have time to do that in time for you to still be able to stay on schedule? Because the problem is this tight schedule now. So maybe Philip.
Well, and this was agendized as direction to staff, but it didn't agendize this committee being able to give our recommendations to council as opposed to staff.
It actually does. I'm sorry, it does. But just to confirm a couple different things. Number one,
and recommend that council advances specific alternatives.
Yeah, advances or eliminates. But sorry, just to be clear, I think the process that we're planning for council is not to have council necessarily make any decisions. That would be a study session. We're trying to catch the rest of council up on where we're at. The decisions would come in June. We're also planning to do additional community outreach in between the study session at council and the June when we're hoping to have council make ultimately for select preferred alternatives. So no, a decision did not have to happen today. But we wanted to allow for it if it could have occurred. Obviously, we had a lot to cover today. So I think that the way we had sort of planned the agenda was a possibility of continuing this item into the next one in conjunction with also getting the memo from the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan on Kellogg versus Seal. So I think that's a possible approach.
I think maybe part of what Nadia was getting at is, and what I want to ask my colleagues is, do we think we need to have more discussion so that toward us providing consensus input to council going into the study session? Or do we just provide them with all the info like we've been discussing and along with what staff has kind of taken our input and consolidated somehow?
I think to Nadia's point about the compression of time, I thought I heard staff say this could come to council the 22nd of April or the 29th. And if it is the 29th, then we have the April 16th meeting of Rail, which would still give us time to make a recommendation and get it into the packet. So I'd prefer that additional, no?
About the packet, staff may want to comment on that.
I might be able to make a late packet, but as it's a study session, it's something that we could definitely get in front of council. Yes, and you're absolutely correct. So we're trying, I think right now there's polling going on to find out whether the council members are all available for that 29th date. And if so, I think this is the big item that we would plan for that meeting.
Yeah, if it's just going to be a study session similar to today, that's fine. I don't think if we're trying to get a recommendation to them from us by the 22nd or something, that there's time for that. So
I'm kind of thinking that at the council study session, even if they're not going to act, we want to set up a straw man of what we think is the direction that we're going. So they have that to respond to as opposed to just the whole range. And they're going to be going from ground zero there.
So that suggests that we definitely need another meeting before the study session.
So
it can't be the
I guess
29th.
let's leave it this way. If we are going to have a meeting on the 29th, we just heard that our next regularly scheduled rail committee meeting
It's the 16th.
16th and could provide input for the study sessions.
Yeah.
If we have to have the study session on the 22nd, then we need to loop back on looking at a special meeting of the rail committee for that discussion. Yeah.
So my only concern about having a study session in April and then having a decision in June is that in my experience, when city council hasn't heard rail stuff in a long time, they have this very long study session that inevitably also draws a lot of public comment. And it takes a long time for everybody to digest what's happened. But if you then wait 2 more months and then
They
have a
forgot what they
decision
learned.
meeting,
Yep.
everybody forgets and needs a refresher.
Yeah.
And I would also just say that from the public's perspective, because I've seen this happen, I mean, I've been doing this 10 years now with high-speed rail. If you have a June meeting, most of the public loses interest by June because they're ready for summer vacation. And this is a big deal. I mean, we've been working on this for a long time. This is kind of the culmination of what we're pushing forward. To have that decision happen in a June meeting.
Well, let me
is-
ask, why are we talking June instead of May for the action meeting on council?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just we have very packed agendas is one key component to that. So we're scheduling it when it can fit, but also noting that what we're planning to do is reopen a revised online town hall to collect comments that can help to inform the council. And so we want to be able to have that open for a time in order to allow people to join the online town hall and provide feedback.
Okay, I think I still share that concern about waiting from April into June, and let's figure out maybe our next meeting.
I mean, we're talking April 29th, which is the very end of April. I don't know when the June meeting would be. It might be more like 5 or 6
Yes,
weeks. As
it's
opposed to
June
2
10th.
months.
Yes, and that's correct.
Well,
So
and just from the public perspective, the June packet, as just a resident who reads that packet, because I'm nerdy that way, there's usually an inordinate number of consent items, like literally, usually at least more than 50. And then all the stuff that you guys in all the different disciplines of the city have to get done before you go on summer break. So these are chock full meetings.
And this decision is going to be so important that we may even need to look at a special council meeting. Yep. So let's figure that out as we move forward. We don't have to decide it today.
As the time check, it's 5:20.
Thank you. Well, Actually, on that note, that wraps up our meeting. We talked about future meetings and agendas. Unless anybody else has anything, meeting's adjourned.